Welcome to Dome Theory live from San Francisco. Sherrod Blakely's joining me from Oakland, so we get the full Bay covered here. Josue Pavone, I think, is just landing down as well, and we're about to cover the NBA Finals, Sherrod. This is going to be your, let's see, one for Detroit, right? Or two?
Actually, two for Detroit.
And then
This will be my
two for
second
this
one. Yeah,
with the Celtics.
yeah. And then I covered one. I covered the Sixers when they went to the finals as well. So this will be my fifth altogether.
Incredible. This is my first. It's fun. Yesterday was awesome. They had the trophy out. I was actually the last one to leave, and they had all the trophies, multiple of them, out there on the
Yeah.
court when I left. And what a special feeling. I don't really even know how to describe it. I guess just take me through your day yesterday and how it kind of compared to some of the media days and festivities around the finals you've been around in the past.
Well, once I got past all of the airport rigmarole with lost bags and all that stuff, once we got past all that stuff, it was a pretty standard media day. And the thing that I think makes it really special this year is that we've been in this kind of pseudo isolated state from players with because of just the different health and safety protocols, and so we really haven't had as much exposure around the players as we're accustomed to having. And it was great to see Al Horford up there on the podium and then have a side conversation with Al, afterwards, or, running to Rich Gotham, the president of the Boston Celtics, and have a really great conversation about, just the Celtics in general, and just being able to do a lot of the things that pre-pandemic we kind of took for granted. And to be able to do that on a grandest stage of them all with the NBA Finals is just a great, great feeling, great opportunity. And it's one that, I think for those of us who covered more than one, we certainly uh, don't take it for granted. And for folks like yourself who are making their first finals, you definitely, I would recommend to soak it all up and enjoy as much as you can, because this, just like it's for players, covering the finals is not a guaranteed thing, no matter how good the team is that you may be covering. As we've seen in this playoffs run, lots of things can happen that could derail your chances. I'm sure the Milwaukee Bucks are thinking, if we had Chris Middleton, we might be in the Bay Area right now. I'm sure the Memphis Grizzlies, if we had Ja Morant for the entire series, we might be, hosting a final. So you can never take these things for granted. And to me, just because of how this season has gone, that point has been reinforced.
Yeah, and this series is super interesting for a million different reasons. I think the way most people are looking at coming in is you have this decade-long dynasty in the Warriors that is keeping rolling here, and the Celtics are kind of this upstart coming up and trying to fight their way into that conversation. I actually kind of look at it on the flip side. The Warriors, to me, are on the come up themselves. Two straight seasons out of the playoffs. I know they have the core veterans there who did it before, but it's been since 2019 that they were on this stage and had all these guys winning at the level that they are now. Caught a few breaks along the way, as you mentioned, the Memphis series, Denver round one to me injured, and then they didn't have to see Phoenix on the way here. So I'm not taking anything away from what they did out west, but I don't think this is the racing train Warriors. And John said this on the Garden Report last night too, that we've seen in past years. They're prolific. I think that's, death lineup re-up with Jordan Poole and Kevin Durant's place has like 124 points per 100. They can defend. They're the number 2 defense here. So I'm not saying this is going to be easy for Boston by any stretch of the imagination. But what I do think people need to understand, and I don't know if you agree with this or not, is that these aren't quite the same Warriors. They're really good. They can be dominant, but they have vulnerabilities, and these guys are just a little bit older, and the backside of the roster is that much younger when you think of Kuminga and Peyton and some of these other guys that you're going to see in this series.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a different dynamic to seeing Golden State 2022 versus Golden State 2018, 2019, 2015. And that's, I think, is a positive for the Celtics. And then you throw in the fact that the Celtics, they're coming into this series with a different kind of confidence than I think a lot of teams have had facing Golden State. A lot of teams, they're looking at Golden State and they say, well, they're a good team, but they are a team that, again, they're such great team. They're such a giant, da 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 da. But the Celtics are like, we've beaten them more times than we've lost to them when we faced them. And I know that there've been some games where Golden State were missing key players, but the Celtics, they've had some games where they weren't at full strength either. So there's a different kind of, I think, attitude that the Celtics are bringing to this series that I think is a good and it's a healthy one. And there are some things that the Celtics, I think, on paper can do that will cause Golden State some problems. And Golden State, one of the biggest things that jumps out to me is that the Celtics are a much better team at matchup hunting against Golden State than a lot of Golden State's other opponents are, because most teams that Golden State has played don't have the number of guys that can go to the basket and get their shots. Like, for example, if let's say they're trying to matchup hunt and get Steph Curry matched up against Jason Tatum, if the Celtics, if that matchup doesn't work right away, you still got potentially a guy like Marcus Smart who can drive and penetrate. Jaylen Brown can drive and penetrate. Derek White, if he's on the floor, he can attack off the dribble. So if they're not, in other words, if plan A doesn't work, they still got a really good plan B, C, and D that they can turn to. And I'm just not sure if Golden State, if their first and second options aren't working, what's the next one? Can they get a good quality look? Like, if let's say you're looking for Steph and you're looking for Clay, and then you go to Wiggins, and then Wiggins is matched up against Tatum. Is that a matchup that's really going to work for you? Or if he's matched up with Jaylen Brown, is that really going to be a matchup that's in your favor? So those are some of the issues that I think this playoff series is going to kind of really iron out and give us a better sense of just how deep is this Golden State team. Because to your point, Bobby, I'm not sure if the level of difference-making, high-impact players is as wide as we've seen it in past title runs by this Golden State team. It's still big, but I'm not sure if it's as massive as we've seen before.
Yeah, they're deeper than the Celtics for sure, but it
Mm.
falls short of, what do we want to say, Livingston and Iguodala, the
Right,
past Iguodala, not this one, who's probably not going to play in the series.
right.
So the depth's there for Golden State. It's just how reliable it is, and that's the story of the playoffs. Every team, every round, these groups get thinner and thinner. We've certainly seen it with Boston here, cutting out Tyson Pritchard, who may or may not return for this series here, but on the defensive point you made, I'm intrigued by this Warriors defense because you look at them, and John and I think Nick were hitting on this last night. Can you attack Curry? Can you attack Thompson, who was a great defender, hasn't been as much this year? Because I would have thought Denver could have done that with Jokic. Round two, you think of Ja, and I guess they did to some degree in that series. And round three, you would have thought Luka would be able to break free and do some stuff against them. But they've remained a sturdy defense that isn't quite Celtics level, but probably the rung below, like in that second tier of great defenses, while playing Curry a ton, while playing Thompson and Poole, and these smaller lineups that you think you can go after. And I'm sure the Celtics think they can going into this, but whether it's Draymond Green, I guess, or Kevin Looney's emergence, like they've been able to defend at the highest level, even when you look at them and say, oh, they're smaller, they have Curry that you can go after. And so that's kind of the catch-22 for me is I think the Celtics think they're going to be able to do that going in, but are they actually going to be able to do that?
Well, I think just by simple running your offense, you're going to get a really, really good player on your team offensively matched up with Curry and not even really have to aggressively match up hunt. Because think about it. When you talk about Denver, you talk about, Phoenix, there's Denver, other than Jokic, is there anyone that you worry about going off for 30, 35 points? I
No.
don't think so. And if you look at Dallas, I mean, Luka and Brunson, that's probably it as far as guys that you feel good about going off for 30, 35 points. And then you look at the Celtics. Tatum, obviously, Jaylen Brown, obviously, Al Horford has shown the ability that he can do that from time to time. Marcus Smart can give you high 20s. Derek White, a guy that we haven't really talked a ton about. And when I say we, I'm talking about the media in general because he really hasn't given us much to talk about other than I'd say the last month or so. They have 5, 6, 7 different guys that if they got 25 points in a game, it wouldn't come as this, oh my God, where did that come from? Because we've seen Derek White show the ability to score in bunches. We've seen Marcus Smart when he's playing like top shelf Marcus Smart can get you 25 and 9. Al Horford, again, when he has it rolling, he can be a big factor. And obviously Tatum and Brown, doing what they do. So the Celtics, I think that their strength is the ability to hit you in waves, whereas I think those other teams have a really dynamic punch or two. The Celtics have a bunch of body shots they can throw at you. And I think that is going to really be the challenge for this Golden State defense, which is really good. They're really good. But I'm not sure how they're going to weather the storm of multiple punches coming at them because they haven't played anyone up to this playoff run that has that as part of their DNA, and that is the ability to hit you in waves. So I think that's going to be fascinating to see how they respond to the Celtics and the different guys that the Celtics can put out there who can get buckets.
Yeah, all this stuff makes this series super intriguing. It's overdue. We remember 18, 19. It seemed like these teams were on a collision course. They
Mm-hmm.
both fell off for a year or two there after that. And now they're back. They're different and they're dynamic. And Steve Kerr was making a lot of comparisons yesterday between these two teams' rises. I think first and foremost, you look at the first year head coaches. Steve
Mm-hmm.
Kerr taking the Warriors to the finals in his first year, and now Ime Udoka doing it. I find those two super intriguing as sort of the main characters entering this series, the voices of these teams, and guys who have had a ton of success now. And the last time I actually had you on Dome Theory was when the Celtics hired Udoka, and we were trying to figure out who he was, what he'd bring to the table here. You were holding out a little, but I think he's proved himself to everybody at this point. And the one thing I've loved about him all year is the confidence. He says, we're going to do something. They go and do it. And he makes it look easy in many ways, just the amount of stuff that he's been able to accomplish. And the first thing he said after game 7 is, we're very confident going into this series. He talked a lot about the physicality that Boston can play with, wearing down Curry, Thompson. That's stuff we've seen the Celtics do to other stars at this point. Kerr is interesting. I, I feel like Warriors fans go back and forth on Kerr. He has a great reputation, obviously, because of what he's accomplished here. But I just wonder, I know it's not the place you usually start with a series, but this experienced head coach in Kerr versus this first year head coach in Udoka, who has the upper hand there?
I would say Steve Kerr has the upper hand simply because he's been on this stage, he's won on this stage, and he's done it in a rinse, recycle, repeat style. He's not a guy that just got here and won a title. He's won a few. So that in itself gives him an advantage over Udoka. But here's the thing about Ime that we've come to understand. He is what I would call irrationally confident about this team
Yeah.
because his confidence stems from things that don't even exist. I mean, go back to the Milwaukee series where they lose game 5, and he's talking about, well, this will just make winning the series all that much sweeter. I mean, who the hell says that when you're talking about the
After the
defending
worst loss of the
after the
season, too.
worst loss of the season to the defending NBA champion, who now you have to go in their building and in a must-win game to keep your season alive, not even to win the series, but to keep your season alive, to fight another day. That is something that there's just you have to be irrationally confident about yourself and your team in order to not only say that but believe that, and most important, have your players believe that. And that's the thing that he does, I think, is really to me, that's the secret sauce to his success, is that he is giving these guys lip service that they absolutely believe 100%, and the proof is in the fact that they back it up. And he's been really good about being that type of leader, that type of coach that can speak things into existence, and his players will go out there and do their damnedest to make it happen.
He did sound a little disheveled, as disheveled as I've ever heard him after the game 6 against Miami. And I haven't done a show since the middle portion of that series, but it got scary there going down to Miami. The turnovers flowing like a river for the Celtics and them being unable to shut it off. They finally did early in game 7. I think the starters had one turnover in that first half, but that's the concern for Boston coming in. We've talked about some of the positives that they have coming into this series. The negatives, I guess, are just the general inconsistency we've seen from them in this postseason, and giving the ball up and getting stagnant offensively, settling for jumpers. That's something they definitely can't do in this series. But the turnovers are the big one. I don't know where this issue came from. I guess teams started to key in on them and realize if you pressure the ball handlers on Boston, they're not the most reliable dribblers or facilitators in the world, and you can disrupt this offense by getting extra aggressive. And Golden State certainly has the guys to do that, between Green, Gary Payton coming back, who I think is just such a key guy
Mm-hmm.
to guard Tatum and others here coming back from his injury. So they have the perimeter defenders, and Thompson has the pedigree too to do it, to disrupt the Celtics here and force them to turn the ball over. Now, I was looking at the numbers. Both these teams turn the ball over at pretty much the same rate. The
Right.
Warriors are pretty sloppy too, around 15% turnover rate these playoffs. They don't score a ton in transition just based off the numbers in these playoffs, especially compared to the Bucks and Heat, who were just sort of automatic when they got out on the break. So maybe we're just all kind of in PTSD mode over the last two rounds here, over how the Celtics have thrown the ball away and how that's killed them. But I still think it's a concern here. How much are you keying in on that coming in?
Well, if I were the Celtics, I would absolutely. I mean, obviously they went back and they looked at the Miami film before they moved on to this series. But Jaylen Brown's Game 7 might be the blueprint for his career if he wants to be
Yeah.
an elite. I mean, low turnovers, still being aggressive, taking advantage of the mid range
What was the
space.
difference for him? Because I noticed it too. He was completely different ball control wise in that game.
Decision making. I think that was it. Really, it comes down to having the ball, getting towards the paint, and making a decision to either take that extra dribble and potentially draw two or three more defenders, or stop the dribble right there, give it a dribble, and just pull up for a short jumper, or reset the offense to get the ball back in a better position to score. I thought he did a phenomenal job of doing
The
that in
word we
Game
love
7.
here.
I know that's the Bobby Manning. That's if this were a drinking game, phenomenal would be the word. But
We're
but
still waiting
he,
on the phenomenal shirts, by the way. They're
exactly.
coming.
But he did a great job of just recognizing when to attack, when to reset and swing it out, or when to just pull up for a short mid-range jumper. And his ability to understand how to maximize that space in the real estate between the 3-point line and the paint, that's huge. Because the one thing that they don't do enough of, Marcus Smart would be an exception. These guys never look to shoot floaters. Um, I've been the more I
Except
watch them
White.
play.
White's the
Right,
only guy who has
right.
one.
If Jalen and Jason added a floater to their game, particularly in transition when they've got teams on their heels, that's going to either get them more baskets, it's going to get them more free throw attempts, or it gives another wrinkle to defenses that they may not necessarily be able to equip themselves to handle. Because right now, teams are looking to draw the charge or the strip whenever those guys have the ball in transition. But if you introduce a floater, now all of a sudden they have to think about maybe I need to get out and defend. And if you do that and you're backpedaling, you're more likely than not going to foul them on the shot attempt. And that, if you're the Celtics, that's what you want. You want to put defenses in positions where they have to think more than just react. Because right now, I think I see a lot of reacting defensively because people know what those guys want to do. But to your initial question, Jalen, it was just a much better thought out game as far as what he needs to do in terms of passing, shooting, and things of that nature. And that's why he played better. And that's why, again, Game 7, that's the blueprint for Jaylen Brown to be a great player in this league.
X factors. We talked about them last night. These are the guys I think are going to be crucial in this series. The guys away from Tatum and Curry, who are obviously going to draw tons of attention, get taken off the
Right.
ball, be forced to take difficult shots, all the rest. So, who gets freed up? Marcus Smart took a ton of threes late in that Miami series just because he was open, and he
Right.
didn't hit many of them, but they were there and he took them. I'm sure they'll be here again in this series. Jaylen Brown, you mentioned everything key on him coming in, but these Warriors guys, you just think of what Klay Thompson's done in these playoffs, the 8 of
Mm-hmm.
16 from 3 to close the last series. Jordan Poole, who has been terrifying, had a huge game against the Celtics, by the way, the last time they met.
Right.
I think he shot 6 of 10 from 3 in that game. There's so much shooting on this Golden State team. Unlike any team the Celtics have played so far. Now, Miami, Milwaukee, they had shooters, and maybe you could say that the Celtics sealed those guys up and shut them down. I saw guys missing a lot of open shots in those series and just completely underperforming. I'd be stunned if the Warriors do the same, and that's probably the biggest fear coming into this series is, let's say, a guy like Klay or a guy like Poole getting open away from the pressure and hitting everything. And Poole in particular, since he's just that third rung down, you're probably going to pay attention to Curry. You're probably going to have Klay wrapped up. But here comes Poole just getting free against whoever it is on the backside, Jaylen Brown or whoever's going to cover him, and hitting a bunch of threes. And I'm not sure how you account for that if you're the Celtics and you have basically played one-dimensional teams when it comes to Giannis, Butler last round, and KD certainly in round 1.
Yeah, I mean that's a big fear because those guys are not going to be missing open shots. They're not built for that. They're built, in fact, just the opposite of that. When they get open looks, they're going to make you pay, and that again, that's going to be the challenge. That's why I think the Celtics will definitely see, I think, a little bit more small ball lineups than we're used to. I definitely see Derek White being a major player in this series because he has to be kind of almost like that Swiss Army knife type of player who one minute you're guarding Steph, another minute you're guarding Clay. You may get some Andrew Wiggins. You might get switched out where you got to deal with Dre. You have to be prepared for any and all of the shooters if you're the Boston Celtics. And so really the importance of the Celtics being locked in defensively on one page, on one accord, it means a lot always, but it particularly means a lot if they have any shot at winning this series. I love the fact that this defense that the Celtics have, that is supposed to be one of the best ever, or certainly one of the best we've seen in quite some time. This is the ultimate challenge for a team like that, a team that has the ability to hurt you in a multitude of ways. You want to see Andrew Wiggins and Peyton and some of the guys not named Steph Curry and Klay Thompson shoot more than they normally do, because their chances of them missing is significantly greater than it is with Steph Curry and Klay. And so, again, a lot of this, I can't wait to see this thing get going, because there's so many different elements and layers to this thing that really, we don't really have a sense of how the hell it's going to play out. We know
Yeah.
that but we know it's going to be, we know it's going to be impactful. We know that the rotations and the rosters and the lineup changes and tweaks and all that stuff is going to all come into play. It's just a matter of how is this really going to look on the floor. I'm excited to see what that looks like.
Yeah, it's gonna be intriguing. I'm sure it's gonna change as the series goes on.
Mm,
Rob, you think of him. He'll probably be prominent to start. Does he finish the series? That's a big key on the Boston
yeah.
side. Golden State certainly has a number of different lineups that they can run. You look at the numbers, prolific in the smaller lineup. We talked about all the problems that could present for them, though, against the Celtics here. And then they have a defensive lineup with Looney and Green out there together that's been even better defensively in these playoffs than the Celtics have been as a team. 101 defensive rating, dominant number, especially in the postseason, given some of the offenses that they've played. They played good offenses out west. So there's a number of different styles that these teams can both play in. That's going to evolve over the series, I would imagine. We talked about the Warriors' key guys for Boston. You mentioned White. There's Grant. There's Rob. There's Horford, who's been awesome. There's Marcus Smart. Number of different depth guys on that roster that are going to be crucial for them to win this series as well. Who do you think is the most important for them to come out of this series?
Well, I think the head of your snake has to set the table for everyone else. And I think Jason Tatum has to be top five Tatum. More than just 5 minutes, more than just
So
10
it's
minutes.
all about Tatum.
Well, I think it starts with Tatum. I think it
All
has
right.
to start with Tatum. I think if he's coming out and he's being lethargic, whether it's not shooting or missing a lot of shots or just not really putting his imprint in some fashion on the game, I think that's going to be problematic. And again, he doesn't have to score a ton out the gate, but his presence has to either open things up for him or open up things for a Jaylen Brown or an Al Horford. But there has to be a domino effect of what he does in a positive way for the rest of the team. And whereas Golden State, I don't think they necessarily need that to happen. One, they're at home. And so to me, there's always a little bit more runway that you got to play with when you're the home team. You don't have to get off to a great start, because all you need to do is have a good 90 seconds, 2 minutes to get the crowd into the game, which will get you fired up. And so I don't worry so much about the home team getting off to a slow start or not. But if you're the Celtics and you want to really give yourself the best chance of winning the series, you have to set the tone early and force Golden State into start playing the game of adjustments sooner rather than later, because both teams are going to have to do that. But the sooner you can get them forced to do that, the better chances you are to get that game one win and take and get a little bit of control of this series.
I like the answer. Yeah. On the Garden Report, we're usually talking about those smaller guys. Oh, what's White doing? John usually goes from Neesmith up when we start a conversation. But this series, I think you make a good point there. It's Tatum. He's going to swing this one way or the other, because he's the only guy on the Boston side who has the chance to rise above Curry and at his
Yeah,
best. I
yeah.
think this season showed it more than any. He can be well above Curry. He's on the first team All NBA. Curry comes in on the second. So I know Curry's the favorite to win Finals MVP, obviously, because the Warriors are favorite to win this series. But Tatum could just as easily grab it. with a big performance here. You think of his game 6 against Milwaukee. You think of his passing throughout these playoffs, which hasn't been mentioned a lot, but it's way up. The
Right.
assist numbers, the amount of passes. These are the two highest assist percentages in this postseason, both of them above 65% as a team. So
Mm-hmm.
you think of Green, you think of Curry, but on the Boston side, it's Smart and Tatum really getting that ball moving. And I've loved what Tatum's done, even though it's been inconsistent, even though he's been able to be slowed. He's dealing with so much pressure. I think this is the
Mm-hmm.
tough thing to gauge with him. His shooting numbers, they aren't great, but
Mm-hmm.
how much of that is the amount of pressure he's facing? All that drop defense, um, all the double teams that he's facing, the turnovers too. You kind of have to weigh him on a scale, right? Because he's getting more pressure than almost anyone in the league would in his spot.
Yeah, I mean, you look back at the Miami Heat series, and you go back to Game 6, which the Celtics um, did not fare as well as they should have. They lost. You look at his numbers; they were great. He was like 9 for 12 shooting, had 24 points, amazingly statistical game. But he did not put his imprint on that game the way he should. I think he had one field goal attempt in the
One
fourth
shot
quarter.
in the fourth, yep.
Yeah. You go back to game 7 where he didn't shoot nearly as well, but had a much greater impact. He had 7 points in the fourth quarter, which, by the way, was more than any other player in that game. And again, you have to judge Tatum on a sliding scale. There really is no hard, fast metrics that you can use to determine with him whether he had a good game or not. I thought his game 7, for example, was better than game 6, not just because they won it, but just because of the impact and presence that he had there. And for Tatum in this finals, he really has to, I think, set the tone. I think he really has to assert himself sooner rather than later as the baddest MF on the floor. And I've always found it interesting that Golden State has won 3 championships, and Steph Curry is widely viewed as the best player in this franchise has had ever, and yet not once has he been NBA Finals MVP. Kevin Durant got it twice, and Andre Iguodala got it once. Iguodala, who, by the way, the year he got it, played 77 regular season games, came off the bench in all 77 games, and didn't start until like maybe, I want to say like game 3 or game 4 of the second round series. It may have been the Cleveland series,
I
but
like this. All right. I'm
he
looking for
didn't.
storylines coming in. Does
He
that
didn't.
matter
This is what matter.
that Curry hasn't won a Finals MVP?
Well, I don't think it matters in terms of winning or losing this series, but it's an interesting reality and an interesting factoid that the best player has won 3 championships, and not once has he been deemed the best player in that route to winning that championship. I find it very interesting, and frankly, it's one of those things that it asks yourself, why is that? I mean, if you're the best player, and this is the biggest stage, why would you not be the best player? I mean,
Well,
for
there's
example,
two.
I mean, like if the Celtics won, let's say the Celtics won a title this year, another title in 3 years, and another title 5 years from that, and let's say this year Jaylen Brown was MVP, 2 years from now Grant Williams is the MVP, and then maybe Jaylen gets the MVP 5 years from now, we would absolutely be questioning whether Tatum is the best player. We
Well,
would
it's weird,
absolutely be
right?
questioning that, and we should, just like we should be questioning Steph. I mean, is Steph a benefit of a system that allows him to really thrive for most of the season, but come playoff time, he becomes a little bit more mortal, not completely mortal, but a little bit more mortal than we saw in the regular season, which opens things up for his teammates, perhaps. Maybe by more focus on him in the playoffs means more opportunities for an Iguodala.
That's what it is.
So
Yeah.
I can buy that. But I just find it interesting that he is, the unquestioned best player who's never won an MVP and he's got 3 championships. Is
I
he a
find it
glorified
interesting.
Robert Horry? Is he a glorified? Is he
I
the
find it
anti-Robert
interest.
Horry?
I find it interesting because Iguodala got that first one. I love Iguodala, one of my favorite players of all
Yeah.
time. Loved him in Philly, Denver, and now Golden State. I, He won the MVP for holding down LeBron in spots, which I liked that argument at the time. I was a big
Yeah.
fan of it because, again, I was a big fan of Iguodala. But looking back on it, didn't LeBron average like 35 in that series?
That was
What did
yeah.
Iguodala really win MVP for? I know he did a good job and he made it difficult, but I think they overthought that one. And it's especially weird because look at the East Finals, and I know they did the whole East Finals MVP for the first time ever this year. I thought Horford had a great series. I thought White had a big series, Brown certainly at spots, but you knew they were giving the trophy to Tatum no matter
We
what. And that's how
yeah,
these awards usually go.
yeah, yeah.
But
Yeah,
it
we
didn't for
we
Curry.
No, it has yet to do with for Curry. And Al Horford was my guy in the playoffs for the East. I just thought
I would
that
have picked Horford. Yep.
his consistency, his impact, he made the. And again, you don't win games as great as Tatum was. You don't win Game 7 if Horford doesn't really put the clamps defensively on Bam. You go back and look at like the last
And
4 or 5.
Giannis and
Right.
Durant.
Right. And the fact that, Jimmy Butler, the reason Jimmy Butler pulled up for that three is because Al was smart enough to give him enough space so that he felt confident taking that. Because if Al pushed up on him, he would have taken Al off the dribble. There's
I
no
think
doubt
that's
about
true, but I
it.
also think Butler was thinking overtime. Damn that! I'm ending this.
Yeah, yeah, and I think all those things were just kind of fleeting thoughts that Jimmy was thinking. But Al, he's been the MVP of the playoffs in my mind for the Celtics. And I know
Yeah,
Tatum is going to get he's going to get all the glory, and Jalen will get whatever glory that Tatum doesn't get. But Al has been that guy. I mean, he's just been that rock solid. Al's play reminds me a lot of when I covered the Pistons and they won a title, and Chauncey Billups was the MVP, and Rip Hamilton was the leading scorer. But Ben Wallace was the reason why they won that title.
the
Even though,
Rock. You call him the Rock.
yes, and that's I mean that's really what Al has been for this team. He's been that rock for them, and you know. Al will be more than happy to give Tatum and all those other guys all the MVP awards if he gets that ring. You can have all that other stuff. Al will gladly give you all that stuff if you can guarantee that he's getting the ring. So
He wants it bad. Smart wants it bad too. I mean, he's ready to play with no arms and no legs if it
I
means they're going
know.
to get that. And I think his resiliency through injury, even though at media day yesterday, did you hear him say, "I'm lucky to be walking" or something to that
I'm,
effect?
I'm
That felt a
listen.
little dramatic.
It felt a little dramatic, but I don't think Marcus is being all that. He's not in good shape health wise. He is playing off of just sheer adrenaline and one of those mind over matter moments where his body is telling him one thing and his mind refuses to listen to his body. I would not be surprised once we get through the playoffs if we find out Marcus. We find out for more details about how badly that foot and that ankle are. But
I imagine.
If you're Marcus Smart, if this pain means you get a shot at winning a championship, you'll do it. Marcus is built like that. He's a throwback to a time when guys would do some really irrational and frankly very career challenging things just to be out there on the field. Ronnie Lott, a great football player with the San Francisco 49ers, had a situation with one of his fingers where he would need surgery and he would miss the playoffs or he'd miss the Super Bowl. And he had part of his finger cut off so that he could go out there and play. Marcus Smart, I don't know if he'd go that far, but
I
would
think he
anyone be
would.
surprised if he would? Exactly.
Yeah.
That's he's built from that type of cloth. So,
That would
yeah,
have been an all-time moment if they came back and won that game after he came out of the locker room after really turning his ankle in that game. And
yeah.
that more than any, I think, is the injury that's hampering him going into this series. I do
Mhm.
want to dive into a few more storylines, but Smart, we just talked about Rob. We went in on him heavily, in depth. It was pretty much the whole show last night, so I don't want to go too
Mhm.
far in on it. But what are
Mhm.
you expecting from him in this series? Because if he's healthy and he's impacting the game the way he normally does, I think the Celtics win this series with relative ease, but he's obviously not that Rob right now.
Well, the good news for him is that you've got a little bit more of runway between games. They're not playing every other day, and that's going to be no one is going to benefit more from the schedule than Rob Williams at this point, because he's the one guy who needs time, who needs to be able to put a little bit of space between games to let his body recover and get as close as he can to being the Rob Williams that we know can be a difference making high impact player. In fact, I'm expecting him to be at least 85% Rob for most of this series. And if he's able to do that, that is why I think the Celtics can win it. It's not because of Tatum. It's not because of Jalen. It's because of Rob Williams' ability to impact the game at both ends of the floor. His ability as a rim running lob threat offensively. What he can do in that free safety position as a defender. Whenever there's dribble penetration, he's going to be that eraser that can knock that out. And his ability to step out on shooters. I mean, that's the beautiful thing about Rob. Rob can give you a little bit of space and still block your shot, which is a very unique talent that is, again, it's one of the things that sets him apart from a lot of folks.
The corner threes he was blocking in that Miami series were incredible to watch. And that's where you saw the sliver of him being his old self. And
Right.
then game 7, he's throwing the ball out of bounds and doesn't even want it and is completely out of sorts. And they got to pull him out of there because he
Yep.
could barely play, it looked like. So that's the
Yeah.
ups and downs they're probably going to see from him in this series. It's a weird situation where some days he's good, some days he might not even play at all. I wouldn't be stunning
Right.
if you enter game 4 in this series and it's like, oh, Rob out, knee soreness. And all of a sudden Grant's thrust into that spot.
Right.
We're about to get out of here. We got to hit Chase Center, do all the things we got to do. I'm sure we'll be early over at the arena tonight. We'll have coverage throughout. Josue Pavone is going to join me outside the arena in just a couple hours here. We'll talk to some fans. We'll do our own preview out there, so stay tuned for that. But storylines, there's many in this series. On the court stuff, we've already talked about it. Off the court stuff, I loved a lot of the stuff that was talked about yesterday, whether it was Kerr comparing Boston's rise to Golden State's. I love the Smart Draymond comparisons, and I just love listening to Draymond himself talk about the way Smart leads the huddle and breaks down the X's and O's. A lot of really good stuff, just in terms of the storylines entering this series. If you're looking ahead, 6-7 games here, what are your favorite storylines between these two teams heading in, if you had to give me one or two?
Well, I would say one of my favorite storylines is how it really does feel like this is a passing of the baton finals, where you've got this, glorified champion of yesteryear who's still got some fight in him, still in the mix. And lo and behold, here comes a team that the blueprint that they've used to get where they're at looks a lot like the blueprint you used back in 2015. You got a new coach who comes in there, changes a lot of things, changes the culture. You've got a couple of young stars on the rise, haven't really been on this big a stage before, but have shown the ability to not be intimidated or stymied by, those type of things. And you've got a lot of X factors. You've got a defensive player of the year who has the ability to defend all 5 positions in Marcus Smart. You got another defensive player of the year on the opposite side of that in Draymond Green, who has, he's a bigger version of Marcus Smart, essentially. And so, again, I like the parallels between the two teams. That's one of my favorite storylines. And the other one that I think is just really, worth watching is Al Horford. And just kind of that. And it's a very consistent theme that we see in almost every finals, that one aging vet who finally gets a chance at winning a ring. But the difference I'd say with Al is the role that he's played in helping them get here. Typically, aging veterans, they're kind of along for the ride. They kind of, they just happen to be part of the caravan. And as we get closer to this point, we start to notice them more because they're literally the oldest one in the building. But you look at what Al has done as a player in helping them get here. In the Milwaukee series, where I thought he was the best player, I think he's been the most consistent player throughout the playoffs. Just all the little things that he has done to help position his team to win the first championship in more than a decade. I find that one of my favorite storylines in all of this.
Yeah, I love those. I love Golden State too, going for a second round of this run. And I was wrong about them. At the deadline, I'm looking back and I read that column at BSJ every week and I'm sort of bouncing around the league. And there was a stretch there where they were really struggling without Green. And I think people forget this. They were in a bad place. Like they lost a ridiculous amount of games after he went down, after a hot start. And around then, you're wondering, should they trade these young guys and should they go get a Sabonis? Should they go get a Turner's Green Insurance? And I was waving the flag hard for that. I'm like, you have this core that's getting a little older here, probably can't push through if Green doesn't come back. Consolidate all these young guys and go all in on a veteran. And they didn't do it. They stood completely pat. They didn't make a single move at the deadline. Green did end up coming back. They hit their stride again. Clay came back, struggled at first, but he looks more like himself again. And they have this underbelly of youth now. Jonathan Kuminga, Moses Moody, James Wiseman, who hasn't played this year, but I'm sure they still feel good about him into the future.
Mm-hmm.
There's this second layer to the Warriors, who could even be part of this series, but is probably going to be a bigger part of next year and the year after that, that they're trying to extend this 10-year run now into 20 years. And this is sort of the beginning of it for them. And this is what I wrote about CLNS this morning. This is kind of just the beginning for them too. Like this isn't the upstart Celtics playing the Warriors at the peak of their powers. This is the Warriors sort of at stage 1 of, or stage 2 probably of their mini rebuild here, and this is them trying to get back to that same point. So you talked about passing the baton. It's almost a divergence point for these two teams. Like, who's going to step into that top spot in the league again here? Is it Boston? Is it Golden State? Will they hold on to it after a couple of years off? And it wouldn't be stunning to see these two teams meet again in a couple of
Yeah.
years. On the other side, though, Boston's got some work to do when it comes to the underbelly of youth on their roster, because we haven't seen Neesmith at all on this postseason run. Pritchard has been there in spots, but it really doesn't feel like there's another wave coming for Boston. I guess we saw it with Grant this year. There's been some other development around the edges there, but mostly the Celtics are the veteran team.
Yeah, they are, but they're what you call a young veteran team. I mean, they've got
Yeah.
like you look at a guy like Tatum who's only 24 years old, but he's been around the game long enough to know what he needs to do and how this roster, I think, needs to be constructed in order for him to be the best version of himself that he can be, and this team can be the best version of itself. They're at a very unique point where they've got the potential to put together a team that can sustain top shelf status for years to come. But they're going to have to get lucky. They're going to have to, get a guy like Jan Madar in here who can come in and hit the ground running and maybe contend for Rookie of the Year or something like that. They're going to have to find ways to amplify this team's success in ways that aren't traditional. Like, you're not going to go out there and hoodwink someone and get the number 3 pick for the next 2-3 years like you did Brooklyn to get Tatum and Jaylen Brown. You're just not going to be able to go that route. You're going to have to find free agents, probably overseas, who for whatever reason are being overlooked, that you can bring in and can give you something sooner rather than later. And the Celtics, I think they're up for that. I think they're definitely built for that. But to your point, Bobby, you also – you're going to have, frankly, a short leash on the Neesmiths of the world. I mean, you don't have time to develop guys the way I think you would have if you weren't as close to being a championship. And you don't get any closer to being a championship contender than where you are now.
Do you
So
think you need to?
develop those guys?
Yeah.
I think you need to develop them only if you've got something in place that can get you by as they develop. Like, for example, if let's say you bring in a free agent who can be a backup 3, who's maybe an aging veteran, you can let Neesmith kind of mingle in the whole D League for a bit and maybe at the end of your bench for a little bit and gradually bring him along, because I do think at some point he's going to be a decent player. I do. I still think, but do you have the patience? Are you in position to be patient with him? I think that's the bigger question. And
Yeah.
I would say as the Celtics get closer and closer to being a consistent top tier NBA Finals contender, the answer is no. You don't have patience. You don't have time to develop.
No, and they've shown that. So
Yeah.
they're going to have to, again, it's how much depth you need. I think they've surprised all of us with how thin they've played throughout this entire run to get to this
Mhm.
point, cutting out that rotation at right about the 7-man mark. And
Yeah.
teams have done it before. It's the story of the playoffs. But I feel like you go through another regular season, Horford's another year older, you're going to need sort of that next array of young players to
Yeah.
develop in here. And I found it strange this year how they stacked the bottom of the roster with my guy Cornette and Malik Fitz and all these other guys who just aren't close to playing and probably aren't part
Yeah.
of this team's future. And maybe they go out and replace those guys this summer with actual prospects that they want to develop and rise up, like Yam, like some second-round picks and undrafted free agents. I love how there's more and more of those every year. But for now, the Celtics are completely invested in their veterans, their rotation guys, and the thin rotation, and it's worked for now. But
Yeah.
like the Warriors, you want to have, I think, a couple guys who are next up. And I see people talking in the chat. I know Tatum and Brown are young. I know the starters on this roster are young. You don't really need a next wave like the Warriors do because they're older. I just think it's always good to have a next wave for depth purposes, to just keep forward thinking and be a well-rounded team, not one that's just all in on its starters and its health. If you get injured one year, you want to have a guy who can step in and fill in for a spot like Tatum did when Hayward got injured in 2017. So
Mhm.
that's why I'm keying on that, but that's a story for the future. For now, these teams are going to play tonight. The NBA Finals are finally here. 12 years in the making, from the rebuild through the Isaiah years, through the early Tatum and Brown years, and the disappointments that followed. They're finally here, and I think they have a chance to win it, Sherrod.
Mhm.
I pick I picked the Celtics in 7 coming
Mhm.
in. I love their size, their physicality, and just the overall success they've had against the Warriors this year and in years past with this group.
Mhm.
Where are you at on this series?
Yeah, I mean, I that was my call as well. Boston in 7 because I just think that, and again, I go back to Rob Williams. I just think he's going to be such a difference maker in this series, and the fact
If
that you
he
get
is, they're gonna win.
if you in the way the schedule breaks, it affords the Celtics to be able to get as close to what they would normally want to get out of him, game by game basis, where you've got a little more runway in between the games for him to recover. And so I think that's going to be a huge factor in this series. Uh, but again, Golden State, they're good. I mean, it should go without saying, but they're really good. And they're the type of team that, again, they're not going to beat themselves out of the playoffs. You're going to have to beat them. And I think the Celtics are built to do that. But it will not be easy. You're going to have to, like I said, Rob is a guy that I think can be real huge, big difference maker. But setting the tone from the jump has to be Tatum. He has to be top 5 Tatum from the jump. Anything short of that, they're going to struggle.
I like that line. That's your go-to line there. Top 5 Tatum. It's the key to this team, key to this series. We will be all over the series here in San Francisco. Sherrod Blakely's on the ground. Joe Sway finally made it on the ground today as well, so he will be out here, and we'll have wall-to-wall coverage of the finals. Garden reports every day, inside the arena, outside, after. Jimmy and John at home. They'll be hosting a bunch of shows that we'll all be jumping in and out of throughout the week here on CLNS Media. So make sure to subscribe to CLNS Media Celtics All Access. Have those alerts turned on. We are brought to you by Calm. We're going to remain calm. 7-game picture, Rod. That means things are going to go wrong along the way. I don't think our people in the chat get that. Like, there's going to be a rough loss here. There's going to be a disappointing finish, a collapse, I'm sure. We've seen it in every series. But you're going to have to remain calm because getting to 7 means you're going to lose 3 along the way. And those are tough to deal with at this point in the postseason. So get on calm.com/garden, yoga, sleep help, meditation, anything you need. You're going to need to get to sleep after the late tip-offs in the series, 9 o'clock Eastern. Probably won't be getting to bed until 1, 2 a.m. We won't be until 3, 4 a.m., I suspect, when we're back in Boston. So we'll all need calm. Go over there, get 40% off, help the Garden Report. Get through our road coverage out here in San Francisco. Support our sponsors. That's the best way to do it. Appreciate the time, Sherrod. I'll see you over at the Chase Center. And like you, I'm just thrilled to watch this finally. We've been talking about it for a week. Been dreaming about it for years. This is just an awesome matchup, and it's going to be an awesome series.
Absolutely. I'll see you soon, Bobby.